Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our chair tonight, Gail Fleming, for some introductions.
Oh, thank you very much, Helen. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm just going to start us off before we get stuck into things with an introduction to our fantastic panel this evening. So my name is Gail Fleming. I'm the Director for Education and Professional Development here at the RPS, and in a previous life I was heavily involved in the development of the Oriel programme, so it is something that I'm very passionate about. So working through the panel as they appear on the screen, I'll just ask each of our panellists to introduce themselves. So Bella, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Bella and I am the current Vice President and incoming President of the BPSA, the British Pharmaceutical Students Association. I've just finished my 4th year of pharmacy at Cardiff Uni, so I will soon be starting my foundation training year. Yeah, so I look forward to answering your questions today.
Fantastic, thanks very much Bella, thank you for joining us. Next up is Atif.
Hello everyone. My name is Atif Shamim. I'm the Associate Head of Pharmacy for HE London and the South East, and also Head of the National Recruitment Scheme currently. And also it's very nice to see that all the men on this webinar got the blue shirt dress code memo. We're all colour coordinated for you today.
Thanks very much, Atif. I'm just looking at all the ladies online and going, oh, we've gone for diversity and colour this evening. Okay, next up on the panel is Mark Valera. So over to you, Mark. Oh, muted.
Sorry, there's always one, and I feared it might have been me. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Mark Valera. I'm a recruitment service delivery manager within Health Education England, with oversight for foundation trainee pharmacist recruitment.
Thank you very much, Mark. And next on the panel is Peter.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here. Atif stole my line. I did notice that we were all wearing the same colour tonight, but there we go. It's always good. Sorry, I'm Peter Hamilton. I'm one of the senior educators who work at NHS Education for Scotland, and kind of taking a lead with recruitment this year.
Fantastic, welcome Peter. And our final member on the panel this evening is Laura.
Good evening everyone, I'm Laura Doyle. I head up the undergraduate and foundation pharmacist team at Health Education and Improvement Wales.
Super. So, and next up, just to give you a feel for what we're going to be doing this evening. Now, I would expect that all of you who are on the line tonight should already have had some preparation sessions within your university, which will give you an overview of the National Recruitment Scheme and how Oriel works. So just to be clear that what we're aiming to do this evening is not to repeat that presentation. This is more of a discussion panel with our broad range of panelists. So the way in which we've approached this is really about giving you answers to any of the more common questions, anything that hasn't been clear from the sessions that you've had today. So many of you have submitted questions when you've registered for the event. So we have, and many of them have been the same questions. So we themed those and we are going to really organise this evening as part of a discussion. At the same time, we do encourage you to pop any further questions you've got into the Q&A, and what we're going to do is either weave those into the existing questions that we've got, so we'll pick them up as we go, or else Kina and Helen will answer them directly if there are things that we can easily answer. We've got just under an hour and a half to go this evening, and we're going to structure the session into 3 different sort of sections. So we're going to start off with a focus on the recruitment process itself for this year in 2021. Then we'll talk some more about the detail of situational judgment tests and the numeracy test that's in the recruitment process. And then we're going to finish off with a final section on preparing for recruitment. So top tips from our panels on really how you apply and get the most out of the process. And then if we've got any time left at the end and we've had any other questions which don't quite fit into those categories, then we'll see if we can pick them up with you. So that is the plan, and I think without any more delay, let's just get stuck into it. So the first question we've got for this evening is, as you can see on the slide here, really, can you give us an overview of what's new for 2021 and what are the key dates that we need to be aware of? So perhaps if I turn to you, Mark, maybe you could start with that one for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. So there isn't a lot of new this year, which, considering how changeable the last 18 months have been for us all, I would see as a positive thing. We are remaining SJT and numeracy assessment only, and we're going to be touching on the rationale for this a little bit later. Our timeline has remained almost identical to last year. So we opened for applications last Wednesday and we close on the 23rd of June. As far as key dates go, I would argue that this is the most important to be aware of at the moment. We do not accept late applications. Of course, we should have no need to even consider them, as I'm sure everyone will submit in good time and not leave it until the last hour, day, minute, or second. Some of the other key dates to look out for, all of which I'd like to add are contained within our rather extensive applicant handbook, which, if people haven't already reviewed, I would implore you to look at that. So we have the preferencing window, which opens on the 28th of July and closes on the 29th of October. So there's plenty of time to review and carefully consider the available training programs. And we're going to be touching quite a bit, a lot more later on preferencing and top tips for that. There's the SJT numeracy booking window. So this is between the 4th of August and the 18th of August. There's a 2-week window to book onto a Pearson VUE Centre. There's the SJT numeracy assessment window. So this is where you'll actually be sitting your assessment at a Pearson VUE Centre. And this is between the 27th of September and the 9th of October. And lastly, initial offers, which are scheduled to go out on the 10th of November. That's just a sample of some of the deadlines to look out for. But as said, these are all listed amongst others in our applicant handbook. Now, in terms of what's new, the big news and the good news is that Scotland have joined the scheme on a permanent basis after a successful pilot last year. And we're really happy to be joining forces with them and sharing our expertise and best practice across England, Wales, and now Scotland. For applicants, this means that all 3 nations will be using the same selection methods, so SJT and numeracy at Pearson VUE Centres. So if you apply for the Scottish vacancy or the England and Wales vacancy, you will only have to sit 1 assessment. The key thing to note here is that they are separate vacancies, so we'll require 2 separate applications, 1 for Scotland and 1 for England and Wales. And our next speaker, Peter, I think is going to talk more about some of the differences within the Scottish model, which is where we're moving on to next.
Well, that was a lovely little segue there onto the next question.
Right.
So thanks very much, Mark. Lots of dates there, but just to reiterate, really, do make sure that you've got your applicant handbook to hand, because all of those key dates are in there, and it's important that you don't miss any, because there really isn't any leniency if you miss any of the deadlines. Okay, so moving on to question 2. This is for you, Peter. Perhaps a little bit of detail on what's different in Scotland and how that compares to applications for places in England or Wales.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks, Mark, as well, for that little segue. It was good. So just, yeah, I suppose as Mark highlighted, after a successful pilot last year, we in Scotland have gone permanently are aligned with England, and now the assessment process is now exactly the same. So you only have to do 1 assessment process if you apply to Scotland and England. So we're aligning those processes more. The dates are now aligned, so that actually if you apply to both Scotland and England and Wales, you will get your offer at the same time. And then you can choose at that stage which offer you want to accept or which one you want to decline. So that's probably talking a wee bit about how we've aligned more. I suppose the differences in Scotland, as Mark alluded to, is there is a separate vacancy for Scotland. So you do have to apply to the Scottish vacancy if you want to apply to Scotland. And if you want to apply to England and Wales, again, you apply to that vacancy, or you can apply to both. The other difference in Scotland is down to preferencing. So in Scotland, some of our training providers traditionally have always had, all our training providers traditionally have had a preference list. We took the decision last year to give our training providers the option if they wanted to put in a preference list or not. And roughly about half our training providers decided to put in a preference list and half decided not. So we've done the same this year. So we're seeing probably slightly more training providers have opted not to put in a preference list. So roughly just below half have put in a preference list. So what that means for you as students is you need to get in touch with those training providers to find out how to get on their preference list. Because if you put them on your preference list and you're not on theirs, then you cannot match to them. Okay, but if you opt to just put people who don't require preference lists, then you will not, you don't have to be on their preference list. What I would say is the best place to find out if you need to be on a preference list is to look on our training provider information statements, which are on our website right now. You can go on, you can see every single training provider, and you can see which ones offer a preference list and which ones don't. And if they do want a preference list, then go and get in contact with them. And the other very small difference in Scotland, well, the other slight difference in Scotland is as well about preferencing, in that you as students will preference the training provider. You will not preference the actual programme or site that you're going to. So you will, for example, preference Boots, and then you would match to Boots, and Boots will then, you will organise with Boots in Scotland which branch you're going to be matched to. Okay, all this information is on our website, so if you want to know more, please come and speak to us or have a look at our website and you can find out more. Okay.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's really good. I'm just wondering whether we might just want to make sure, is there a link to the website in the applicant handbook as well?
Yeah,
make sure
I think there is.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Okay, right, next question. So the next couple of questions, Atif, these are for you. So if we start with question number 3, could you share with us what factors were taken into account when deciding how to run the scheme this year?
Sure. So I think the first thing to say, as Mark has already kind of alluded to, is these last 18 months have been very, very uncertain. No one really likes uncertainty, and certainly with COVID, every time we think you're out, it just keeps on dragging you back in. What we wanted to do, certainly with the National Recruitment Scheme, was to give that certainty at least to this process. So our thinking there was to actually come to a joint consensus so that we could tell everyone as early as possible what the direction of travel was, so that everyone knew what was coming up and they could start to work towards that kind of destination. So we kind of started with a couple of assumptions. So the first was that by September, October time, when you guys would be sitting your kind of SJT stroke numeracy, we set the assumption that most of the restrictions would have potentially lifted, but there may be some control measures in place still, which may limit people actually going to large-scale centres. And certainly if you look at things that are happening with the sort of Delta variant now, things are going a bit up and down. So there is no certainty that actually by September, October, we'd be totally clear and everyone could go to the centres to do their MMIs, multiple mini interviews. So I think something that we've seen really well, both this year and last year, actually, for the whole process since it started, is the spirit of kind of collaboration that we have with all of the stakeholders. So with this process, as we did last year, we actually engaged with all of our stakeholders and partners. So some of our colleagues that you can see on this call, people from Scotland and Wales, the BPSA, schools of pharmacy, employer groups, employer representatives, we all work together to actually think what would be the best option, what would be the fairest option for all of you guys that would be sitting the test, and what would be safe for all kind of members of the public in the scenario that come September, October time, there would still be some kind of national control measures in place. So thinking about the actual interviews themselves, and the reason why we chose not to go with those for this year again, is that all of our kind of interview panelists come from employers that recruit via the NRS. Now, if we've seen anything in COVID, is that all of these frontline pharmacy teams are absolutely vital in the fight against COVID, both on the front line and behind the scenes in community pharmacy, hospital and GP, which is where all of our kind of interview panelists come from. So thinking of a situation where even if some of the controls had been lifted, we were very clear that all of these staff that would have been used as our sort of panelists would still be engaged either in kind of in the active battle against COVID or dealing with the after effects of it. So it would be very hard potentially for all of these employers to actually free up staff for all the time that we needed them for. Now, bear in mind, with the number of you that we would have to interview, you need thousands of people, both as kind of interview panelists and all those people that set the scene behind the scenes to actually make sure that the process runs really well. So we couldn't really justify that kind of situation, bearing in mind the sort of national uncertainty as well. So that's why we went with SJTs and MMIs only. We've also got the experience now of many years worth of SJT use, and we know that they work really well. But also, particularly of last year, we've got the experience that we can run this process very successfully by using the SJTs and the MMIs only. And one of the key considerations for us there was that actually this process can be used by candidates anywhere in the world. So if we are in lockdown, and even if it's not lockdown in the UK, but there's people abroad that have gone back home but can't come back, they can still sit their test in their sort of country of choice. Or if they're self-isolating, they can still sit the test. So that for us, going back to the fairness aspect, to try and make sure that the process was not only robust, but actually as fair as we could make it for as large number of candidates as possible, meant that we felt that this was the way forward. And I think the last thing to note is that we don't work in glorious isolation within pharmacy recruitment. So HE manages a number of specialty recruitments on a really large scale. And over the years, and per each round of trainee recruitment, we all work together to actually learn from each other, learn from things that have happened with other specialties, and actually feed those in. And actually, we're quite lucky that Mark's on the call, because Mark leads on a number of specialty recruitments that are not linked with pharmacy. So Mark, if you maybe want to give some of your expertise on what you've seen over the last 18 months or so with those other specialties.
Yeah, certainly. So I would echo that we don't, in pharmacy, we don't work in a vacuum. We are closely linked into other health education staff groups and specialties. So we sort of monitor the direction of traffic for them and how they're approaching things. So there's been no face-to-face recruitment in 2021 so far, and we don't see that changing at the moment. There are ongoing conversations about 2022 recruitment nationally. And once we have more of a steer on these plans, and as I say, the direction of traffic and other specialties, we'll be able to review these to see how and if they might be effective for pharmacy, taking into account the scale of our recruitment and the current pressures being faced by our workforce. I do think that we as a specialty are in a very strong position, that we've got the SJT and numeracy process as a robust selection method for now. But we are keeping a watchful eye, and as hopefully restrictions ease and life goes back to some form of normality, things will start to change. I think that the one thing that we can say is that whatever future decisions are made, that they'll be in collaboration, as Atif alluded to at the start. The decisions we make are done with a lot of stakeholder engagement. We don't make them lightly. We make sure that the correct voices are heard and enough voices are heard to ensure that any decisions we do make provide us with the highest standard of recruitment, irrespective of the environment we find ourselves in.
Thanks very much, Mark. So I guess just building upon that point about different recruitment methods, Atif, maybe if you could just share some insights on the performance of students in 2020, where you just used the SJT and numeracy, just so people can get a sense of what difference does that make compared to MMIs that were used in previous years.
Sure. So I think the first thing to note is both this year and last year, the kind of SJTs that we used were no easier or no harder than in any previous years. And I think that's the main kind of advantage we have, is that we've got many years worth of experience of actually using SJTs now. And what that means is that we can be fairly sort of confident that even if we don't have the kind of MMI part of the process, candidate performance won't generally suffer. So something to note about these SJTs is that they are written specifically for this one process. They're not used anywhere else, they're only used in this process. They're all written by subject matter experts who work in the fields in which they're writing the questions for, and are also really well versed in the use of the SJT format and how it works best. So in that context, looking at the scores and the number of people that were successful over these last 2 years compared to kind of previous years, we haven't seen a huge increase or decrease in those numbers. I would say, looking, just thinking off the top of my head at the last year's recruitment, I think the difference between that and the candidates that sat the MMI was in the region of about 1%, something like that difference. So the actual numbers that actually go through the process and are successful is very similar. And that's not really a surprise if you think about the things that we're looking for are not kind of exam pass-fail questions. It's actually asking about the nature of the person. And actually, if the nature of the person is the same, whether you're testing that in an SJT format or in an MMI, the kind of essence of the person, if you will, is what normally comes out. And that's why normally in the scores that we've seen, where we've kind of correlated SJT scores and MMI scores, it's not a surprise when we see that those candidates that score well in the SJT also tend to score well in the MMI, because we're kind of testing for similar kinds of things.
Okay, thank you very much, Atif. That's really comprehensive. Let's move on to the next batch of questions. So we're going to carry on with recruitment processes. We are mindful of the questions that are coming in. Some of those we will weave into these as we go, as I said before. So if we haven't answered your questions straight away, don't panic. Hopefully we will get onto it as we go. So first up, lots of change on the horizon in relation to regulatory standards. So this next question is about really, how does the new GPHC initial education and training standards affect the recruitment process? So Atif or Mark, I'm not sure which one of you would like to take this one.
Mark, I can take it if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the process, you will see no difference at all. So all you guys that will be doing the process this year will be doing exactly the same thing that your colleagues did last year. And the reason that the process hasn't changed is because obviously we're still recruiting to kind of NHS values, and the kind of person we want to actually represent the NHS hasn't changed over the last year, simply because we've had new kind of IET standards. That the kind of nature of the person is still the same, and the values that we want them to show are still the same. The other thing is, because these IET reforms are fairly new, we felt it was a bit unfair to actually start to make wholesale changes to a process in which people are still trying to digest, understand, and actually translate what these new things mean for them. And we felt it was actually, you know, potentially unfair to you guys as the next cohort coming through, that you've not had the chance to actually work towards these new IET learning outcomes, and certainly your schools of pharmacy won't have had that time to actually talk to you about them yet either. So certainly with this year, we felt that the process should stay exactly the same, so that all of you guys understand exactly what the process is, what the values are that we're looking for, and actually even if we were to map more closely to those IET standards, the nature of the person we want within the NHS is still broadly the same. So therefore, the things we're looking for are also broadly the same.
Thanks very much, Atif. Okay, and how will the changes to foundation training impact training programmes? That's a broader question, but I am aware that there may be differences across the 3 different countries in relation to this. So perhaps if I could just have a shorter comment from somebody from each of the 3 countries. So if I start with Peter, and then I'll come on to Laura and then Atif.
Sorry, just trying to get myself unmuted. So in Scotland, I suppose we've had a national programme for quite a number of years now for all our trainees. And I suppose what we're trying to do this current year and for next year is work quite closely with our post-registration foundation team and pull a lot of those prescribing skills that are going to be coming into those learning outcomes earlier and into the foundation training year. So things like decision making, consultation skills, managing risk, these kind of things we want to try and start to weave more into the undergraduate, or not the undergraduate, the initial education and training standards in that foundation year, so that once you move towards the end of that year, you're much more kind of getting ready for your prescribing, because as you guys are slightly further on, you'll be starting to think about doing your prescribing that hopefully at that earlier stage. The other thing we've kind of brought in for this year is a lot more support with these changes for our designated supervisors to start building in a lot of training and support to build in some new ways of supporting your students and providing feedback to students using more supervised learning events and trying to build more of that into the kind of tools that the designated supervisors can use during the year. As well as that, I suppose we're just trying to make sure that the trainees are as comfortable as possible with all the changes and know what the expectations of them are with all these new learning outcomes, because that's a big thing, especially this year, where these trainee pharmacists are coming in and not really knowing what the changes are exactly, and we're trying to build that in as early as possible. So that's probably a couple of changes initially that we're starting to build into the programme.
Thanks very much, Peter. And Laura, do you want to comment as well?
Yeah, thanks, Gail. So similar, I think, to Peter, in that in Wales now we have a single lead employer model for all our trainees in Wales, and from 2022 all trainees will be on a standardised curriculum multi-sector programme which is achieving the same learning outcomes, which is already mapped to the interim learning outcomes, with support provided via handbook for trainees and supervisors and supervisor training. So within that curriculum there's defined learning outcomes and assessments and what's required to be met by all trainees. So it's very clearly laid out, and that's complemented by our standardised offsite training programme, which is involving more elements such as, clinical assessment skills, clinical decision making, risk management, as Peter alluded to as well. So those over time, over the next few years, obviously we'll be integrating more IP elements within that 5th year, but we've made a good step towards that ready for 2021, and we'll take it further for 2022.
That's great. Thanks very much, Laura. And Atif, would you like to comment on England?
Sure. So to kind of echo what the guys have said already, really. So it's a change for kind of everyone. It's certainly a change for you as trainees come into the process, and those 55 learning outcomes are now out there. So there's no harm in you actually starting to look at those now and think about what they mean for you in your practice. Certainly that would be a good way to spend some of your time so that you're kind of ready for that change. But it's also a change for all of these all of these employers too. And their responsibility is to actually look at their current training programs and start to think about and actually kind of implement how they will map their current training program to these new learning outcomes over the course of the next year. And as Laura's mentioned, it's a kind of iterative process that will reach fruition over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. So it's not a massive big bang. However, the expectation is that all employers will make sure that they're working towards those learning outcomes for the time that you guys start. So in England, to actually help with that, HEE is formulating a national offer. So there's a whole separate work stream around this with loads of foundation training program directors and leads that are looking at what that national offer will look like. And there's quite a lot of information out there already for both you and your future training providers. And what I'll do, I'll just find the link for that page. It has those all that information on there, and I'll stick it in the Q&A so that you can all just copy that and read at your leisure.
Great, thank you very much, Atif. Coming back to you, Laura, really lots of interest in the multi-sector placements in Wales. So perhaps a more specific question here about what is COVID going to impact upon those at all in terms of the format of delivery or any other relevant changes in relation to those?
Okay, thanks, Gail. So I guess broadly to begin with, in terms of multi-sector placements, and I think this can be echoed across both Scotland and England, we are seeing an increase in general with the number of multi-sector placements being offered across all three nations, and I think it's a really positive step with the benefits that it brings in order to be able to see the entire patient journey, to be able to provide care in any of those sectors, and to be able to, I guess, make a more informed choice, having had significant exposure in those sectors in terms of your future career and opportunities for you. So as I said, Wales will move into entirely multi-sector for 2022 with equal time spent in community, hospital and in GP practice. So that's taken started this year really with that model of 4 months in each of the sectors. And the pandemic, whilst it has impacted certain elements, so for example in community pharmacy, some of the medication reviews as part of the contract have not been taking place, so in order to meet those outcomes they may have had to have discussions on cases and real patients to meet those outcomes, but we haven't had any trainees that have failed to meet any outcomes in each of the sectors, just albeit that maybe some of the delivery has had to change subtly depending on where the patients are coming in and if those services are being provided. Things are certainly settling on that front now, and most people are having exposure to everything they would have had previously. We have made some alterations to the delivery of the offsite, and whilst this year it was predominantly online, we are going to be moving to more of a blended approach, which is will be echoed across really the other nations to keep some elements of what's been good about the pandemic and some of the changes that have been positive, but also keeping elements of the existing programme and having face-to-face elements maintaining within it.
Thanks very much, Laura. So yeah, lots of practical stuff about what we've learned on the hoof really over the last year and how that can roll forward. Okay, we are now going to move on to preparing for the recruitment process. So Bella, I'd really like to bring you in on this one. You have lived experience of this, so it'd be great if we could hear about, I guess, your top tips of the best ways for preparing for the recruitment process. And also we've had some specific questions in relation to references and how to select a referee. So if you could pick that up within this question, that would be great too. So over to you.
Thank you. So preparing for the process, the main thing to do is read the applicant handbook. It gives all the information, read it properly, make sure you understand what's there and how to navigate around the website. It can look quite complicated at first. I remember thinking the same thing, but just make sure you sort of understand what the different tabs are, how to look up, you know, the applications that are around, how to filter as well. So those are sort of the main things, as well as the dates. So make sure you know the dates that you know, need to be sort of in your head all the time, because there's months and months sort of that this process goes on for. So, you know, when things open, when things close, you know, from booking dates to when they actually are happening and when you'll get your offers. Also how long you have to accept your offer, because it's a short window. And be proactive. So we've had some questions around reasonable adjustments. Even if it's that, just be proactive and try and get that in as soon as possible. So stuff like extra time. Yeah, and then about referees. So with your character reference, this is often going to be your university personal tutor. Your uni will probably tell you to use them. If not, you can always, you know, just ask to make sure this is okay. Whatever referee you end up using for either, make sure that you have permission to use them, because they will be asked to write a short amount of text. And then with your employment, it can be somewhere you've worked, or including a placement. The more recent, the better, of course. But just whatever you end up using, like I said, just make sure they're comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you very much. And then just before we start to move on to some of the nitty-gritty about SJTs and numeracy, Mark, I wondered if I could bring you in as well. Just think about some of the other questions we've had in specific to the process. So people asking about reasonable adjustments. So any comments you could share in terms of whether you need to apply for reasonable adjustments. I think there have been some people thinking, would you automatically know? Is it about disclosure, but more about the positivity of why you should say and how that can help you?
Yeah, thanks, Gail. So the first thing to say is 100% apply for reasonable adjustments. If you're someone that requires them, then we absolutely want to support that. There is a healthy section in the applicant handbook which talks you through all of the process. But to sort of break it down to a few quick bullet points, it's, you send the application during the same window. You send your reasonable adjustments application during the same window as the general application, so it's open now. As long as you have evidence to support it, which the evidence is clearly laid out in the handbook, then it will be approved. I would say that 99.9% of our reasonable adjustments get approved. We're absolutely not trying to prevent people from having those. If you're someone, they say that requires that and has had it before, then that's something we very much want to support, but that comes from you. So just because you've had it before at university, you see, we're not going to know that, and it's up to you, it's incumbent on you to fill out the application, to submit the evidence, to do it in a timely manner, to make sure that we are able to facilitate those, whatever the requirements are. So yeah, just to stress, if you are someone who has reasonable adjustments, then please do apply. And if you do have questions, then you can always contact us at the national team for further information.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm just going to pick up on one other question which has been coming in before we move on to SJTs, and that's on the back of the question about the new GPHC initial education and training standards. So just to be clear, there have been some questions around about whether the programmes that are advertised here, the vacancies, will include whether you'll be doing prescribing, an independent prescribing course next year as well. So the answer to that, I'm going to look for anyone to correct me, but as far as I'm aware, the answer to that is no. There are the new IET standards broadly do include prescribing, but the decision by the regulator was that for next year, because there is so much to do to make sure that everyone has a positive experience, the standards that you'll be working to do not include the specific IP standards within that. So no IP this year, but as Peter and Laura and Atif have described, this is all about moving you in the right direction. So a focus on how do you bring IP into the post-registration period, and how do you better prepare people to prepare to be prescribers. That's quite wordy. So that's a sort of summary of the state of play on that one. Right, now we're going to move on to SJTs and numeracy. So, well, this is a very broad question to start. So Atif, why do you use SJTs to recruit?
That is a big question, isn't it? So it kind of goes back to making sure what the purpose of this whole exercise is, that we want to make the process as fair and as robust and as unbiased as we possibly can. Because if you go back years and years, when there was no such thing as this scheme, there was lots of anecdotal information that actually there was quite a lot of bias in recruitment across all specialties. And what we wanted to do was to try to make sure that as much of that bias was taken out, so that the best candidate got where they wanted to get to, regardless of their background or which school of pharmacy they went to, all of those kinds of things. So the first thing I think to say is, although SJTs as a concept are fairly new in pharmacy, they're not new in healthcare specialties, and they're certainly not new in values-based recruitment. So there's at least 20 years worth of evidence that you can look at that shows that they have a great value in actually teasing out the kind of essence of people that we're trying to tease out, and loads of evidence that says that they help to minimize bias kind of across the landscape, which is the kind of thing that we're looking for. For those of you that like their research, there's loads of work out there, for example, by people like Patterson et al. You can go back as far as 2009 and look at all the work they've done on how SJTs help to reduce bias in recruitment processes. So that's the first thing. And now, although there's loads of evidence, as I said, in loads of healthcare specialties, particularly medicine, we now have at least 4 years worth of solid, robust evidence for pharmacy, specific to pharmacy, that shows that this process actually works really well in pharmacy as well. So I think in answering the question, I'll probably talk about why what SJTs aren't, so that you understand why we use them. So an SJT is not testing your cognitive ability, right? So it's not about getting a question right or wrong. It's all about the values and the traits that you have as a human being that we're actually looking for. And the reason we've gone down that road is that by the time you actually go into your pre-reg, you'll have done 4 years worth of exams, you'll be a master's level graduate. I think we can be fairly certain that you're sound academically, because otherwise you wouldn't have made it out, we would hope, at the end of those 4 years with a master's level degree. So why would we want to test academic capabilities yet again when you've gone to an accredited school of pharmacy and you've actually made it out with your MPharm? What we're looking for is the other things, is the values and the kind of attributes of you as a person. So what the SJT does is it places you in a hypothetical scenario that is centered around a pharmacy setting and simply asks, what would you do in this particular situation? So it's a situational judgment test. You are placed in a situation that will be centered in the pharmacy world somewhere, but actually that setting doesn't make, is not that important. It's the actual context of the question that's being asked of you as a person. So in that situation, what would you do to actually solve the problem that you're given? So I think in a nutshell, if that's enough, Gail, that's why we use SJTs. It's all about the values. It's about being fair and robust, loads of evidence for their use, and loads of evidence that shows that they help to minimize bias in the process. So again, it's not about your background. It's not about your school of pharmacy. It's not about what your predicted grades are. It's not about what you've got at A-level. It's about who you are as a human being and how you'd fit into the kind of NHS family and serve our patients in the best way.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Atif. So just to labour that point, it is all about having an evidence-based approach and making sure that we eliminate subjectivity from the process. So thank you. And keeping on that theme now, in the past, as we've already talked about, that we've had multiple mini interviews alongside the SJTs. So perhaps, Atif, if you want to give a view on this one to start as well, about how do you ensure that students who prefer interviews are not disadvantaged because they don't have MMIs?
Sure. So I think the first thing to note is that, this is a contingency plan. It's not our kind of option A, and contingency plans by their very nature tend not to be as good as the primary option that you would use. So we also value MMIs. I'd say that, that I don't value a old style interview process where you've got a one-on-one interview, because that brings in all the bias that we're trying to get rid of. So the MMIs are the way to go if we want to make sure that the process is fair and helps to actually take out some of the previous biases that we've seen in healthcare recruitment. So bearing all of that in mind, we understand that this is a plan B. It's not plan A, because if it was plan A, you'd all be doing MMIs as well as the SJTs. But as a plan B, it's a bloody good plan B. It's really, really robust. We've got loads of evidence, as I've spoken about, that lends itself to the fact that this is a process that teases out all the things that we want. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the kind of analysis post-round that we've done shows us that SJT scores tend to correlate fairly well with the MMIs. It's not 100% correlation. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that because we are looking at values-based recruitment and we are testing things in both settings, that helps to lend credence to the fact that we are using both of those methodologies in the right way. On the specific aspect of the fact that, for example, MMIs are very heavy on things like consultation skills, situational judgment tests are not perhaps as good at testing those kinds of things. However, if you look at the attributes that we are testing for, none of those are kind of tested in isolation as a separate island of attributes, because they all sort of mesh into one. So I'll just look down at the list of attributes and give you an example. So let's see, what should we go? Okay, so for example, one of the things we test is person-centered care. We also test multi-professional working. So if you look at those two things, they are looking for things like empathy, making the person feel valued, feedback, all of those kinds of things that you'd actually be also testing in consultation skills. So although we're not directly testing it in the SJT, we are indirectly testing it because of those things that, because of those values that work across multiple kinds of attributes. Something that I would say is that now that we've got a multi-year experience of SJTs, and we know that they can work and we know how to write them so that they are context specific for pharmacy, because again, that's really important for SJTs, that the context has to be specific to the area in which you're recruiting to. In every SJT paper that you see, we have a few trial questions in there, pilot questions. So these are questions, because we write new questions every year to actually add to the existing questions that we have. And those new questions are written and tested in exactly the same way. So written by subject matter experts in the field in which they work, but also people that have had experience of education and also writing SJTs, and then also externally examined and tested as well. But those pilot questions don't add to your overall SJT score because they've never been tested in a live test scenario. So with those pilot questions, normally what we do is after the SJT, those questions are psychometrically analysed to make sure that they're fair, robust, there's no variance in responses, and then those are then added to the bank for the next year. So because we've got all of this experience now, what we'll be trying this year for the first time is within the pilot items, we'll be trialing some questions that focus specifically and kind of emphasize the consultation skills element to see whether they can work in the SJT setting as well, bearing in mind that we are already testing a number of cross-fertilized values with the other things that we test. So that will hopefully lend itself, if those questions pass the test afterwards, to further questions in subsequent years being used.
Thank you very much, Atif. Okay, next up, this is one for you, Mark, but I'm going to widen this question beyond as it looks on the screen, because we've had a few questions which have come on. So the specific question is about scoring and ranking when you've just got SJTs and numeracy. So perhaps if you could just talk us through, give people an idea of how they are scored. We've had a specific question about what happens if people get the same score, but we've also had questions in which I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about how employers might rank them. So perhaps if you could just give an overview of how are you ranked, how does this work through a central system, that would be really helpful. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, so the first thing it says, the employers don't rank you at all. That's not what this, this system is about. So we will use your SJT score. So the SJT score you receive against all of the other applicants to give you a rank. Now, for our offers process to work, everyone needs a unique rank. So to enable us to do this, we have a number of tiebreakers. So first tiebreaker we look at are the trialed SJT items that Atif was just referring to. So they don't contribute to the overall SJT score, but they do measure the same attributes, and as Atif said, are developed following the same process as the scored items. If we can't split applicants based on this, we then look at specific attributes that are measured within the SJT. Now, the order of these attributes was based on employer feedback in terms of their importance. So they are person-centered care, professional integrity and ethics, problem-solving, clinical analysis and decision-making, and multi-professional working and leadership. So in the very unlikely event that we still can't split after going through the trialed SJT items and these specific attributes, we would look at the numeracy score. So just to, and we're going to keep referring back to it, all of this information is contained within the applicant handbook, but just to stress that everyone always receives a unique rank, so we don't have an issue of people getting the same offer. That would never happen within Oriel. One of the many reasons why we use the system is it can work out that ranking for us. And again, just to stress again that employers don't feed into that process. It's objective in that sense.
Thanks very much, Mark. So for some of the people who've got questions around about, I haven't got placement experience, is that going to affect how I score or rank? The answer to all of that is a very clear no. You are ranked based on your performance in the SJTs and in the numeracy. That's what it's based upon. Your experience, of course, could be helpful to you because, as Atif has described, the SJTs are all about context. So the more experience you've got, the more you'll be able to think straight away about what would I do in this situation. It's more realistic to you than if you haven't been. So thanks for that, and hopefully that's answered all the questions we've got on ranking. So the next question is I guess if I stick with you, Mark, because you've lived and breathed Pearson VUE centres, so something that you're well familiar with and have worked with for a good number of years now. But using Pearson VUE was a new experience for the General Pharmaceutical Council this year when they ran their first online registration assessment in March. And many of you on the line may have heard that there were some challenges within this. So perhaps this is a little bit of confidence building about the experience that HE in particular has in working with Pearson VUE. So Mark, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, Gail, Health Education England have got a long-standing relationship with Pearson VUE. We've used them for GP, dental, clinical radiology recruitment for a number of years. And last year, this was expanded to ACCSEM, anaesthetics and paediatric recruitment, among other specialties. In pharmacy, this will be our 4th year using Pearson VUE centres. And during these years, we built up a really strong stakeholder relationship with them. And I feel that each year we've learned certain lessons and we've been able to improve the assessment experience for applicants. I think from both sides of the relationship, so from us and from Pearson VUE, we've learned from the experience and taken some of the things that went well and some of the things that didn't go so well to adapt and improve over those 4 years. We have a dedicated project manager at Pearson VUE, and we meet regularly to get progress updates and to talk about the scheme. These meetings become weekly as we move towards peaks of activity. And as I said, I feel that Pearson VUE have got a really good understanding of our requirements, and in turn, we understand how their centres work. And this puts us in a really strong position to be able to provide clear and accurate guidance, which we have in the handbook, which we have on our own Pearson VUE homepage. So if we do have unforeseen incidences, either before or during the assessment window, then we can act very, very quickly to fix those and to support applicants where needed. And I don't see that being any different this year. So I hope that offers some reassurance.
Thanks very much, Mark. And perhaps if I just stick with you on the next question as well, if there's any specific comments on students who are currently overseas.
Yeah, so just to say, Gail, that Pearson VUE have a wide and far-reaching number of test centres all over the world. I can't think of a single incidence where we haven't been able to find a test centre or a slot for an applicant, no matter how far-flung or exotic their location. We also, I think Atif mentioned it earlier, we also have the option for home testing again this year, should we need to use it. So one of the big advantages of having the SJT in numeracy, again, which Atif alluded to, is that those applicants that are overseas can sit it either in the country that they're currently in, or as I say, we always have the fallback option to use home testing should we need it.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And then just before we move on to the next set of questions about preparing for the recruitment process, just going to pick up on a couple of other questions which we've had come in. So we've had a few questions, particularly about references, because there is some difference between England and Wales versus Scotland on this one. So perhaps if we could just have a few words on what's the purpose of the reference, because people I think get some anxious about how many should they have, who should they ask, you know, what's the context of the reference. So perhaps Peter, if you could comment on the situation in Scotland, and then I don't know, either Atif or Mark, one of you to comment on more broadly. So Peter, do you want to comment on references, please?
Absolutely. So I think the references are there for the employers once you're matched. So what we would do is, as part of the application form, they're passed on to once you're matched. So they're not used as part of your application. They're used once you match, and they're passed on to those employers once you've matched.
Thank you very much. And any, Mark, I can see you've unmuted. You're ready to roll on this one?
So yeah, it's as Peter said, it's exactly the same process in England and Wales. So we collect the references as part of the application form. They're in no way used to assess or decide who gets which jobs. Those references are then released to employers once an offer's been made and that applicant's been successful. So that's the purpose, and they would then form part of the employer's pre-employment check.
Super, thank you very much. Okay, right, we're going to move on to our final batch of questions which we've pre-prepared, and we'll continue to still try and weave in some more. So we're going to start off with preferencing. So Bella, I wondered if you'd like to share your thoughts on this one, any advice on the best way to approach preferencing?
So I think the first thing I'd say is know what you want, not what other people tell you you want. And that means within the sectors that you're applying for, locations, there's lots to think about when you are preferencing. And people will tell you, you know, this is the most competitive, this is the best place to be, this is the best sector to go into. And it's not necessarily true. It's about what you want and what you want to get out your pre-reg year. And I think that's really, really important. So there's a lot of filters where you can use when you're doing preferencing, and there's lots and lots to think about. And I know it can be quite daunting. So stuff to think about is location. Where do you want to be in your pre-reg year, foundation training year? Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be where you were at uni? Do you want to move across, you know, the UK? And then how are you going to get there? Transport, how long is it going to take you? You've got to go to work, it could be 40 hours a week, plus you've got to revise for the assessment at the end of it. And then whether you're living by yourself, you know, make dinner, all that kind of stuff, and clean, and, you know, it can take a lot out of the day if you're traveling an hour each way. How are you going to get there? Is there going to be lots of traffic, especially, you know, if you're like in London, for example? Accommodation, where are you going to live? How accessible is it and easy is it to get accommodation? Do you have friends who are going to be there, or are you going to be able to find people? How many people are you going to be doing the training year with? Does it recruit more than one person, or are you going to be the only one? And do you work well with other people, or would you rather be the only person and kind of have that attention to yourself as that trainee? Do they offer a training program as well, and do they pay for it? That's really important. That's going to be really crucial when it comes to the assessment and your revision. So that's something to definitely think about. And then, of course, salary and working hours. And that also includes study hours. Do you get study hours? One thing that I definitely recommend is, if you can, try and contact your employer who you're going to be preferencing. If you know you've got something set or that you really, really want beforehand, you can go visit them, do so. If you can talk to them on the phone, do so. And make sure that the information on Oriel is also correct, because sometimes it's not, whether it's study hours, and, you know, employers are also changing throughout the year. So those are like definitely stuff to think about. Reference enough places, especially if you're going for places like London hospitals. They're very competitive. Don't just go with one sector. If you're sure you want one sector, that's fine, put that first, but also have fallbacks. My probably roundabout would be try and reference 100 places. I know it sounds like a lot, but it gets a lot easier as you do it. And the more you do it, you'll just kind of think, okay, I'll add this now. And my last sort of tip on that is don't feel disheartened if you don't get where you want. It's not the end of the world. It's 1 year and it doesn't define the rest of your profession and your future.
Thanks very much. They're really wise words and quite a lot of good, really good tips in there. So I hope you've all been taking notes on that. And one thing I might just add into that is just to say, whatever you do, please don't preference somewhere that you don't want to go. Because I can remember certainly the first year of running this, of having very tearful people who had preference places that they didn't want to go to. Once you've preferenced them, you've got to think very carefully about the implications of where you've put on that list. So if you don't fancy it, don't just stick it down just for the sake of it. Do take time to think about it carefully. So that's my little top tip. And Atif's got his virtual hand waving at me. So over to you, Atif, to come in on this one too, please.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks a lot, Bella, because there's some really golden stuff that Bella said there that we deal with every single year once the process is finished, and actually just a bit of prep from you guys will actually help to ease the burden on you and also on the teams and the pharmacies post round. So, knowing where the pharmacy is that you're going to sounds obvious, but I can't tell you how many trainings we get every single year that haven't bothered to just go on Google Maps and find out how long it will take. So for example, we know everyone likes London because London's really busy and popular, but because it's busy and popular, traveling 5 miles in London can take you anything up to an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, especially if you're using public transport. So actually, if you're going to be using public transport, which you probably will in London, have you actually mapped out that route, that journey time? Have you checked that simply being in London doesn't mean that you can just get somewhere quickly? You really can't. So that kind of stuff is really important. And, to actually emphasize something that both Bella and Gail have said, the power of where you go is entirely in your hands, because it's not in the employer's hands to actually pick you in England and Wales. Scotland has a slightly different process, but certainly for Wales and England, the power of where the trainee goes is entirely in the trainee's hands. So you choose exactly where you want to go. So if that's the case, why would you not spend a bit of time, because you've got months and months now to actually think about where you want to go? Why would you not use that time to really hammer down your choices and find out exactly where it is that you want? And going back to a really key point that Bella also mentioned, that, if you really want a place in hospital, there are hospitals outside of London as well, and some really, really good ones. So don't just think that the best training on offer is the one that you'll get in a London trust. If you spread your wings just a bit further, if you can go that far, you will find so much gold out there, which sometimes goes missing. And you would stand a much better chance of actually getting those places if you just thought about going to those places which perhaps not everyone chooses as their first choice. So, thanks, Bella, for all of those points, because they were, they're really important. If all the trainees did what you just said, we would have hardly any problems post-round.
Thank you very much. And Peter, do you want to say any more about preferencing in Scotland? I know you touched earlier on the employers.
Yeah, I'll just point. I think I just Bella's wisdom and what she's saying is great, and I think I just want to echo Atif and what you've said, Gail, as well. Please don't preference anything where you don't want to go, because we always deal with issues when someone puts something on the preference list and they're not happy to go. I think I would echo, yes, there is slight differences in Scotland. I think what we tend to find is you're preferencing the employer. So most employers are in one region usually. So like NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde is the hospitals in Glasgow, or NHS Lothian is all the ones in Edinburgh. What I will say is if you preference someone like Boots or Lloyd's, which are the bigger employers, then normally there's a conversation that you will have had with those employers before preferencing, so you kind of know where they're going to place you. It's really important, I think, that you go and speak to these employers. All these employers who are wanting to take on a pre-ed trainee or a foundation trainee want to hear from you. They want to know who you are. They want to know who's interested in coming to them. And even if they don't require, or they don't put in a preference list, They still want to hear from you. They still want to know who's interested in them. So go out and speak to them, find out what they have to offer, and don't just think about your pre-reg year, your foundation training year. Think about beyond what's, you know, it's likely you could get employed by that employer after your foundation training year. So what do they offer post foundation? Do they give you a post registration foundation program? Do they support that? Are you going to, you know, how are they going to support your career going forward and your development going forward? And that's something I think really key, because as Bella said, your foundation training year is 1 year. And it is something where you will develop loads through that year, but there's also 40 years after that that you want to develop, that you want to try and get as much from. So please think about where you want to go. And that's not to say you're tied to them for your whole career, but it's just to say that a lot of trainees tend to go stay with that employer and move on with that employer. So it's just something to keep in your mind and think about that. And the very last point is just to echo what Atif said. If you're willing to go out with the regions that are very popular, like in Scotland, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, or Lanarkshire are always very popular hospital sites. But if you're willing to go that wee bit further, then you're much more likely to match to those slightly further out or more remote and rural employers.
Thank you. Some really good points there. Okay, we're going to stick on thinking about different places that you might want to preference, and this time to talk about split foundation placements. So Laura, you talked about these a little bit earlier on. Do you want to say any more about just general experience of split placements?
Yeah, and I think Bella can add to this shortly in terms of, she made reference to the way that you can search, and you can search actually within a filter within Oriel for any multi-sector post. So these are anywhere you spend greater than 3 months in another sector. For me, I think this is a great consideration in terms of looking at opportunities post registration. All the evaluation that we've done on the multi-sector programs to date show that actually it does enhance the practice, regardless of which sector you go on, because you take the learnings from the other sectors. So some examples that we've had is if trainees choose to work in hospital, that they've changed their practice with regards to upon the discharge, and equally this similar because they've been on the receiving end of those discharges within community pharmacy and in GP practice. So I think they are on the increase. I think it's great if you haven't had much exposure to different programs within your M-Pharm, so you're not quite sure which sector you want to work in. I think they're a great opportunity for that as well.
Thank you. Bella, do you want to comment on split placements as well?
Yeah, so I guess it's more just to say, to know what works for you. Split placements, I think, are a great opportunity, but they do come with a need for flexibility and just making sure that, you know, you're quite adjustable, because it is only 52 weeks and your split could be within 3 sectors. So that doesn't really give you, you know, as much experience as you would if you had just done maybe 2 or done the whole year at one place. If you've had placements before in other sectors, and you know that this is what you want and you want to get the most out of the pre-reg in terms of trying to explore different sectors, then absolutely go for it. But it's not, not the best option for everyone. So just to know that.
Yeah, I think, again, full of lots of wisdom here, like going in with your eyes open and what's right for you, really, really relevant. Atif's got his hand up, but before you do, I'm going to throw in an extra little question for you, specifically about split placements. We've had a few questions coming in about industry placements. So I don't know if you were going to mention those, Atif, but maybe if you could just throw a few words towards that, that would be helpful too.
Sure, okay, so I'll answer that one first. So we don't have any industry placements within Oriel currently, and that is the choice of industry, because as you guys probably know, there are many ways that you could potentially get your foundation trainee place. So certainly for industry, if you are particularly interested in that sector, then the only way you can do it really is to actually go on those industry websites, and those ones that do provide a pre-reg former pre-reg, now foundation place, will actually have a separate page listed on there. There's not many of those places nationally, but unfortunately that will be something that you will have to do your own research into. Just to add on the split foundation chat, so all those comments are really relevant, and you know, one of the myths I hear a lot is that, for example, community pharmacy is not a clinical enough environment to actually train in, which is why people tend to constantly go for these sort of hospital placements. That is just not true. So don't just think that you know, a good clinical training experience will happen just in the hospital sector, because the vast majority, I would say, of split placements with GP are within community pharmacy, or the split is very even at the very least. And if you think about how all of these placements started, community pharmacy tends to be the sort of centre of this kind of innovation, and actually all these placements started many years ago, and Gail will kind of recall this because we started these back in 2014-15 in community pharmacy, and it's kind of grown from there in England. So, you know, as Bella's mentioned, and also Peter, just expand your horizons. Don't just focus on the one thing unless that's entirely what you want to do. If you just cast your net a bit wider, there's loads and loads of stuff out there which would be really, really good for you potentially. And just bear that in mind when you're thinking of doing your final list of preferences.
Thanks very much, Atif. So now we're going to come on to talk about offers, and perhaps within that, maybe if we could do a little bit, this is for you, Mark, on just really incorporate, I know this is all in the applicant handbook, but a little bit about upgrades, etc. as well. That would be helpful.
Sure. So you have 48 hours to accept an offer from when you receive it. And if you decline an offer, then you'll be removed from the process. Now, this links neatly back into the preferencing conversations we were having, because if you preference, you know, smartly in an informed way, then why would you be declining an offer? Because it's an offer that, you know, you have preferenced positively, so it should be a training program that you are willing to accept. Now, in terms of upgrades, so once you receive an offer, you'll have an option to opt into upgrades. What this means is, if a post becomes available that you've preferenced higher, then you could potentially be upgraded to that training program. Now, you can opt in and out of upgrades at any time, but once you've been upgraded, you can't then revert back to your previous offer, which sounds like a silly question, because if I'm being upgraded, then why would I want to go back? However, it does happen, circumstances change. So from when you submitted your preferences, your first choice may now be your third choice, your third choice may now be your first choice. So you may not want to upgrade. So I think the key message with this is, if you are happy with your offer, do not opt into upgrades. You know, if you are looking to upgrade, then opt into upgrades, but just remember that it's a one-way street. You can't go back to the previously held offer, because the way that the algorithm works within the system, it would have already been offered to someone else.
Thank you very much. And I know that that is something that comes up every year, doesn't it, about accepting an offer and making those right choices. So I guess it goes back to the earlier points that Bella made about spending time, and Peter also, about researching your placements. Put the effort in at this stage while you've got plenty of time to do it, and don't rush at the end when the offer comes out and make a decision on the hoof. Right, so we've got 50 minutes left. We've got a couple of questions still on the script, which is about preparing for SJTs and numeracy, and then we'll come up and we'll try and pick up some of those broader questions which you have raised. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them. I know that Helen and Kina have been trying to answer as many as they can online as they can get through. Let's just see how we do. So if we can do these next couple in the next 5 minutes or so, that should leave us with 10 minutes for broader questions. So how do I best prepare for the SJTs and numeracy test? Well, that's the golden question, isn't it? And if there was an easy answer to that one, and it was formulaic, then everyone would come top ranking. We'd all learn how to get the highest score, and then the whole thing would be defunct. So that's my comment on it. But now for something much more worldly wise, over to you, Atif.
Oh, I'm not sure I can top that, to be honest, Gail, but I'll try and give a little bit of context. So, in brief, just bring yourself to the table, because the actual questions are asking you about you, and who knows you better than you. So, I will just emphasize again, this is not an academic test. It's not about you having knowledge, and it's not a pass or fail kind of criteria. So it's not a 100% right answer or a 0 for a wrong answer. So even if your kind of answers aren't in the order that that we would expect, you would still get some scoring for how close your answer is to the model answer that we think you should have got. Unless you're totally off beam. For example, if the question asks, what would you do if a patient came into your pharmacy crying, and your answer is, well, turn them around and chuck them out the door, don't expect any marks for that. But actually, if you are thinking in a sensible, values-based way about how you would respond to a situation, the chances are that you probably get some marks for that, for your answer, which is why it's much easier for us to actually separate people out in terms of ranking, because there's a whole range of scores you can get for just the one question. So again, quickly, it's about all of your previous experiences, all the things that you've done, all the jobs that you've had, all the time that you've worked in a team, all the problems that you've solved have hopefully helped to make you the person that you are. And what is the insight that you've got from all those experiences? And I think insight is the key word here, because, and Gail will probably remember this because she was the one that was doing this interview with me, we have had in the past, in the old style interviews, people come in with, on paper, coming from a top school of pharmacy, predicted a first, and they come in and they've done all of these placements and they've done loads of extracurricular activities. And then you ask them about those, and their level of insight into those activities is nil. They've had no insight, but they've just, for the sake of saying that they've done a placement, they've done the placement, but they've gained nothing from it personally. It hasn't helped to shape the person they are, because they think they are the person they are. And actually, that's what the SJTs help to separate out. The people that have insight and have learnt, and the people that have no insight, even if they may have lots of experience. So bring yourself to the table, make sure that you've gained all that experience, and put that experience into the scenarios that you see, would be my advice. In terms of the numeracy, don't even worry about it, to be honest. It's you will be have completed your third year of a master's level degree when you do these tests. The numeracy test is basically a test of your very basic competence in working around numbers, being able to use a sort of calculator, reading a scenario, taking the numbers from that and placing it into a formula to get an answer. Now, there is a time pressure, but fortunately, numeracy is something that you can practice, and I would advise you to do that. If you think that you really do struggle with numeracy, then obviously talk to your schools of pharmacy about further things you can do, but there are things you can practice. Certainly speed is one of those things, but it is a basic level of competence around numbers within a set time frame. And again, if you look at the applicant handbook, we have quite a comprehensive list of the things that we're testing within that numeracy test.
Thanks very much, Atif. Bella, do you want to comment on preparation?
I'm not sure there's much to add, to be fair. There's, no golden rule, as you said there, and it's regarding numeracy, exactly what Atif has just said. If you can get through to your third year of pharmacy, being able to, pass your calculations assessments within uni, you should be fine. Just kind of go over those questions again, just to recap your knowledge. The only thing I guess I'd add is just to figure out what can be asked in both tests. So with the SJTs and the numeracy, what topics are going to come up in numeracy, and also what attributes are being tested in the SJTs. This is covered in the Demystifying Oriel webinar that the RPS will be hosting shortly. I'm not sure what that is. And go to that. I found it really useful. So go to that. And when you're in the SJTs, try and put yourself in the situation and just answer what you think is right. There isn't necessarily a right answer. So just put yourself in the shoes, and ultimately your answer should get you the placement that is right for you.
I couldn't agree with that more, Bella. I think I might just add into this as well of another top tip from me would be not to overthink it, because if you overthink it, you probably become unstuck. So I'll give you an example of some personal experience I had when we were first developing the SJTs. I was sent a batch that a large pharmacy employer used to recruit, and I thought, well, I'll have a go at these, and I really didn't score very well at all. I thought, oh my gosh, what's happened here? But then when I had a discussion with them, they said, but actually that's for someone at a different stage in their career. So these questions are written for people might be at different career stages, or also bear in mind, if you look at, let's say, practice SJTs for different professions, the context is different. So if you try and learn what you think will be the right answers, then you're probably going to come unstuck, because it's not going to reflect you and your personal approach to things. So my advice would be the same as Atif and Bella have said, which is just don't overthink it. And the more you can draw upon your personal experience, that's more likely to put you in good stead. So our last on our preset questions that we've got here about what resources you might recommend for SJTs and the numeracy test. So I'm just going to look around the panel and see if anyone wants to comment on this one particularly. Atif, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so just to kind of echo what Gail said, what not to do is to look at SJTs for other specialties. That is an absolute no-no. I would definitely not advise that. SJTs have to be context specific to work. So don't assume just because you've done loads of medical type SJTs that they will work for pharmacy. They probably won't. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to make sure that you don't do too much prep. As Gail said, the more you think about what you think we're looking for, the more likely you are to actually mess up the question. Okay, so just as I said, bring yourself to the table. That's the most important thing. But there is something around, you know, having a bit of psychological sort of comfort in the fact that you've seen what the questions look like, and I totally understand that. So if you go on the National Recruitment website, Student Zone, we have a couple of PJ articles there which talk about not only the SJTs but the numeracy test, and we've got some sample questions in there as well. But also later in the year we will also have a sample half test of the SJT, so not a full 52 question paper, but about half of those questions, about 25 to 30 questions, we will have as part of the SJT paper that we will publish on the National Recruitment website, which will give you a flavour and explain the thinking behind the answers. But again, do not overthink. Look at it, understand the nature of the question and how the question's answered, and then just turn up, bring yourself, and you will be fine, I'm sure.
Fabulous, thank you. So that's us out our main questions. We've got 6 minutes left, so I'm going to see what we could just squeeze in. So get ready for this panel, because they're going to come at you in a random way. So we've got a sort of theme here about not being able to get a place. How many places should I preference? So perhaps if I pull these together, the gist of the question is, if I can't see lots of places to placement to preference, is it okay to preference just a few? And also linked to that, have there been many students who didn't get any of the places on their preference list? So I might go to maybe Mark first, and then Peter, if you want to maybe comment from Scotland.
So I think the answer, and this has I think been echoed in everyone's comments about preferencing, is preference what's right for you. So there isn't a set number, and people have sort of banded numbers around and previously, but I think that, you know, it's your choice. We keep saying the choice sits with you. No one will make you preference a role, a training program that you don't want to work in. So, you know, it could be, you could preference 1,000, you could preference 100, you could preference 10, you could preference 1. It is entirely up to you, as long as you've done your research. You know, you take it on the advice that, you know, other panel members have given about, you know, being as informed as possible, and making sure that you do your homework. And then Once you've done that, then preference exactly what you want to preference, and don't be influenced by your friends. If someone's done 50 and you've done 500, that doesn't matter. That just means you want to work in 500 settings and they want 50. So it's very much a personal thing, and the power does sit with you, which can be a scary thing, I guess, but it does. So yeah, do what's right for you, I would say.
Thanks very much, Mark. Peter?
Yeah, no, I was just going to echo, yes, absolutely. Do what's right for you, preference where you want to go, make sure it's where you want to go. But I'd also add in, every year there is someone that just preferences one training provider with one person they want to go to, and that's filled before it comes to them, and then they cannot match to anyone. So don't pigeonhole yourself to one training provider. If that's the only training provider you want to go to and that's what you want to do, then go for it. But you are putting yourself at risk of not matching, and that would be, I suppose, my caveat to that is you have to be wanting to go to them, but don't just put all your eggs in one basket. I think I would add, and employers do not see your preference list. Nobody sees your preference list apart from the matching people. So it's really important to not let them influence you. If you want to go with them, put them on your preference list, but it's up to you.
I think that's a really good point, Peter, because there have been people who think, oh, I'll be strategic about this and try and work out what might another employer think. And that's a really good point, that they don't see that at all. So really important to raise. And there is obviously some anxiety in some of the questions here about people thinking, what if I don't get any of my preferences? So I guess that is the balance between don't put places you don't want. Mark, do you want to come in?
Yeah, can I just raise a point? Sorry, I meant to mention earlier as well about preferencing. So we do have enhanced preferencing. So in between offer iterations, you can change your preferences. So this came in, I think, in year 2. So if you put in your preferences and for whatever reason you don't get any of them, perhaps you haven't done as well as maybe you think you've done, or whatever reason, and you wish to change your preferences, you can do so within after the offer iterations. So the national team will send out an email once the first offers have gone to tell you that you can go in and you can re-preference. So you can add more preferences, you can add less preferences as well, depending on your circumstance. So just to be clear, you don't get one stab at it with preferencing. There is an opportunity, or there are opportunities to change.
And then I know you've covered this, Mark, but just to pick it up again, just to be clear on your options when you get an offer. You can accept it, or you can accept and upgrade, or you can decline. It's like 3 options, isn't it?
There's one more this year, actually.
Okay.
You can also hold your offer. So with Scotland being having the vacancy on Oriel, as I said, a separate vacancy, we have been able to link them, so you can now hold as well, because previously people were becoming confused where you could accept an offer in Scotland and you could accept in England and Wales, and it was, well, what do I do now? So just to note that as well, that is a change, that actually you can hold, but you can only hold one offer. So once you get the other offer, you need to decide. So those are your options, Gail.
Fantastic. And how long can you hold that offer for, Mark?
So it will be until the hold deadline, which is in the handbook.
Sorry.
Read the handbook.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 1 minute to go. Atif's got his hand up. So Atif, this could be a final word from you.
Well, just to place some numbers on this sort of discussion and to ease people's fears. So we had in the region of 2,500 people apply. We had about 4,000 places for England and Wales, plus all of those in Scotland. So out of all of those 2,500-ish, and out of those 4,000 places, only about 30 people were left without somewhere to go. And that was purely down to the way that they selected. So if you choose enough, if you choose widely, and you choose sensibly, there's lots of places out there for you, and the chances are that you will get the place that you want, as long as you've done your preferencing according to what everyone has said.
Well, that's a great note to try to take this towards the end. There are more placements than there are people. So if you choose wisely, you should all be able to secure a placement. So what's next? Helen, just get you to move us on the slides. So we've done the best that we can to get through a heck of a lot of questions from hundreds of people this evening. So I'd like to thank Kina and Helen for managing the Q&A that have been coming in. Apologies if we haven't answered all of them, but we will be going through them after this evening to have a look and see if there's any further information that we need to provide. Just want to draw your attention to some workshops that we run that provide you with a bit more insight really into being confident in preparing for the SJTs and calculations. And I just want to emphasize with this that this is not about coaching you to be able to pick the right answers. That's not what it's all about at all. This is about just, I guess, building your confidence in how you approach these questions so you're more comfortable when you go into them and you've prepared really. You're not going to be coached into what's the right or the wrong answer. So if that's what you're thinking, this is not the event for you. But if you want to know more, then please do feel free, book a place on these. I'm sure these are going to fill up pretty quickly. We're going to be running them a couple of times in August, so the details are there. So that's it for us this evening. I would like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to our panel. That was it's been really great to get all of your different insights and perspectives, and hopefully we've given all of the audience a really good responses to many of the questions that they've had. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody this evening, and I'm going to hand back to Helen just to wrap things up. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gail, and thank you to our panellists tonight as well.